Hi, welcome back to the workshop for episode 17 of the ES335 build. And in this episode we're going to be starting the process of getting the binding channels cut. As I said last time, this isn't really something you can do by hand. So this time we'll be making the jig that will make this job possible. Okay, so binding this body is a job I've not really been looking forward to, if I'm honest. It has all the potentials to go horribly wrong, and I've put a lot of effort into getting this body this far, so I really don't want to mess this up. However, there are issues. Normally on a flat topped guitar like a Telecaster for instance that you want to put binding onto, it's just a case of running a router around the edge. Fairly straightforward. This, however, any attempt to handhold a router is just going to end in disaster and probably me making a new body, so we can't do that. So we need to figure out some kind of jig or setup to use to do that for us. Now luckily for me, people have been doing this stuff for a number of years now, so there are a plethora of jigs that I can kind of construct to help me on this. Now the one I'm going to attempt to use is quite straightforward, and I've done a dodgy diagram because we haven't had one for a while, and this one is actually quite dodgy. But what I'm going to construct is a sliding mechanism that will hold the router in one section. So it's a piece of wood with a piece coming off at a right angle. I'll probably reinforce the corners with some angle pieces that the router will bolt to. And then I'll use one of these drawer sliders to attach it to a backer that's there, that will get clamped in the vise so that this piece is extended above the bench top. Now the cutter will extend through the base of the jig, but it also needs something under there to kind of follow the body of the guitar. So I'll be using a domed shaped piece of plastic underneath this right angle extension that will run around the edge of the body and follow the contours as we route round it. The second part to the setup is I need something that's going to hold this at the correct angle and orientation to the router cutter. Obviously, if this is tilted in any direction, I'm not going to get a square cut all the way around. And there isn't really a lot of meat on the side of this body, so I don't want to be doing that. So what I'm probably going to do is construct a board that will have fixtures on it that will keep this as level and parallel as possible. So that's the plan. So I think the only thing we can do now is get some wood out, start taking some measurements and get some cutting done. Okay, so to make this jig I've got a nice big piece of 3/4 inch ply, which will be plenty strong enough, and it's nice and stable as well, so that'll be good. And I'm going to be using my small laminate trimmer type router. Okay, so I'm just going to have a bit of a brainstorm, get a few rulers out and have a quick measure up and see what we can come up with. Okay, so I've done some measuring up and I've worked out that if I cut a strip at 130mm off this piece of ply, I can actually get pretty much all the material I need for this build out of that. So I'm just going to rip that down off camera and I'll be back with you in a tick. Okay, so with that cut, I'm now going to measure a piece about 100mm longer than this drawer slide. I'm thinking it doesn't have to be absolutely 100% accurate for this application, but we'll try and get it as good as we can. And it's 100mm longer, so I've got some material left, so I can place it in the vise to hold it. So I'm going to cut this off with a handsaw because it's too big to go in the bandsaw. And then I need to figure out how long I want this bit. So obviously it needs to be kind of a little bit bigger than the router. But looking at this slide, there's two mounting points there and mounting points at the bottom on this little brackety bit. So I think it would be beneficial to have all of these mounting points employed to this bit of board just to keep it nice and steady when it's going up and down. So we'll cut this kind of there. And this will go on the bandsaw this time, so I'm just going to whip it down on that. So that's the main two pieces of our setup. Next we're going to need the bit of ply that the router will actually sit on, and that's going to be oriented kind of like that. So I'm thinking needs to be about there. So I'm going to cut that again on the bandsaw, and this little bit of material that's left should be enough to form the two little webs that I'm going to put in here just to give it a load of stability. Okay, so we're nearly ready to get this all put together now, but before I do that, I'm just going to mark and drill the holes for mounting the router to this base piece here. So to start that process, I need to take this little black plastic base off the router. And then I need to lay this out kind of somewhere centrally on there. Doesn't have to be massively accurate. I do want to make sure I'm getting this in the right orientation. So I'm just going to hold this in place temporarily with some masking tape and super glue as usual. And then I'm just going to use this transfer punch to mark the holes. Now I'm going to take this to the drill press now. I'm not going to immediately drill out to the correct size. I'm going to drill through with probably a 2.5–3 mil drill bit, because I actually want to transfer those marks to the other side of here, because I need to counterbore these to recess the bolts that I'm going to hold this all together with. Once I've counterbored the underneath, I can then open these holes out to the correct size, which is going to be about 4.5 mil to accommodate the M4 bolts. Okay, so there's the router base attached to that. As you can see, I stuffed it up the first time because I didn't allow for the thickness of this web. So I've had to move it over. I've drilled 2 lots of holes and it looks a right mess, but I'm sure it'll be absolutely fine. So now the last step on this is to drill a hole through the centre for the little bushing to go in and for the cutter to protrude through. Now, I've made a base for this before and it was very, very difficult to find the centre. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm just going to chuck up this little V-point bit into the router and then just gently lower that. And I'm just going to push down on that, and that will give me my centre point. So now all I need to do is take this back off and drill a hole through for the bushing. And speaking of the bushing, I was a little bit of a loss as to what to use for this. I need a quite specific shaped piece of plastic, and I searched all over and couldn't really find one that wouldn't need a lot of machining. I don't have a lathe, so I couldn't do that myself. I have, however, got friends who have got kind of that sort of equipment who I could have asked to do it. But all the time I was having these thoughts, I was also having the thought that you've got something that's going to be really suitable for that, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was until the other day when it sprang to the front of my mind that I've got this old ratcheting screwdriver, but it's actually broken. It just slips when you try and put any great pressure on it, so it's not any use as a screwdriver anymore, but it's got this little cap on the end, and that, I think, is a really good dome-shaped piece of plastic, and it's also got the thread on, so if I can cut an appropriate sized hole in the base, this will actually thread on. And then it's just a matter of drilling a hole through the centre of here at 1/2 inch that will allow the 1/2 inch cutter to protrude through. So let's get this back to pieces and we'll get drilling. Okay, and as it happens, that's screwed straight in. And so now what I'm going to do is take that out again and just drill a hole through it, big enough for the router cutter to go through. Okay, so there's the hole drilled in the middle of that. Went through quite nicely actually, quite pleased with the way that that's gone. So time to reassemble this and see how we've done. Okay, so there's the base all reassembled, and I've got the appropriate cutter in the router, so I'm just going to put it together and see how we've done. And that's absolutely spot on. So now it's a case of stripping it all back down again and assembling all the wooden components together. Okay, so in the end I left this overnight. Life got in the way of guitar making, unfortunately, but that's given the glue plenty of time to dry, and that is really, really solid. So the next step is to get some centre lines marked onto the two made pieces of this and attach the drawer slide that's going to hold it all together. Now I've actually modified this slide slightly. It was held on with 2 screws, but I've opened those holes out to 6mm so I can bolt this onto this frame. Okay, and there it is. There's quite a lot of slop in that. It does move quite a bit. I wasn't expecting that. It does go up and down all right, but other than that I think it is more than stable enough. I'm going to give this a few tryouts with some scrap and see if that movement has any effect on the router. I'm not sure if it will or not. I have another slide, so if this is a problem, it's probably only about 10 minutes work to whip this to pieces and to put another slide onto it. But I'm just going to give it a quick try out anyway, just to see how it works. Okay, so I did a couple of test runs on the original setup. I had to make a slight amendment here because I hadn't left room for this toggle bracket to close. So I've had to just relieve that web a little bit. And I did some test cuts on a little bit of scrap, and it did a decent job, but I wasn't very confident in it. There was a lot of slop with only having one slider on, so as you can see I've disassembled it and I've added another slider, and that is a lot more stable. I've also added a sturdy piece of timber to the back, which has made it much more secure in the vise. So all in all I think that's working really, really well, but the one problem I did have was that there was a lot of vibration when I was running it, and upon inspection I could see that this router cutter is actually slightly bent. Unfortunately I haven't got another one in stock, so that's going to hold me up a bit, but I do still have the other half of this jig to make. So I'm going to leave this episode here, but I'll be back with you very soon when we'll finish off this jig and actually get the routing done on the body. So as always, like if you've liked, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.